Let it be said that I am a man that will humbly admit whenever he is wrong. But because I never am wrong, I don't have to admit anything. Okay, let me start that again. Who the hell knew that Disney had it in them? Disney Star Wars has been one catastrophic blunder after another, starting with The Force Awakens, which at the time everyone was willing to accept as the necessary J.J. Abrams reboot to get everyone interested in the franchise again after a 10-year hiatus. Whereas now, most people have either completely forgotten it ever existed, or still rag on it for being A New Hope 2.0. Then there was the fabulous misfire that was The Last Jedi, which divided the Star Wars fanbase so badly I don't think it's ever going to recover, even to this day, despite it having come out over 5 years ago. There was no middle ground with that movie. You either thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, or thought that Soviet prison concentration camps were more enjoyable. Then of course there was that movie. The absolute worst Star Wars product to ever be dropped on us poor peasants since that flipping Star Wars Christmas special.
A day of harmony.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Oh my God! Wow!
Yes, that is a line that exists. Someone was paid to write that line for a $250 million movie. Rise of Skywalker was shat out in 2019, over 3 years ago, and I'm still salty about that colossal mound of fetid mush and diarrhea. Attack of the Clones used to be my least favourite Star Wars movie of all time, but Rise of Skywalker took that throne indefinitely, because at least I could laugh at Attack of the Clones. I can't even laugh at Rise of Skywalker, it's that terrible. Then there was Rogue One, and not much to say about it except the movie itself was pretty boring until the last 30 minutes when it turned into Star Wars Battlefront. Oh, and of course we got that fantastic Darth Vader hallway scene. Etc, etc, moving on. Oh, and also Krennic was magnificent, and proves that Ben Mendelsohn is brilliant in everything. Solo was surprisingly good, despite the woeful marketing, terrible behind-the-scenes shenanigans, and the fact that we never needed an origin story to Han Solo in the first place. But it felt like a fun swashbuckling adventure in space, but because the movie bombed, it's been condemned to a watery grave where cancelled franchises and bank managers are left to rot forever. So, the Disney-era Star Wars movies were, on average, like getting kicked in the nether regions with a spiky steel cat boot, and the shows weren't faring much better. Mando was a good step in the right direction, and was basically a fistful of dollars in space, which I can get behind, but its reliance on cameos and exceptionally short episodes were really starting to grate on me. The Book of Mr. Bob A. Fett was a confusing and meandering waste of time that basically turned into Mando Season 2.5, with 2 episodes completely missing its titular character. And I'm sure most of you lovely patrons of mine are already well aware of my thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh god, make it stop! I watched 2 episodes of Bad Batch and didn't see much wrong with it, but I was just kinda left bored, so maybe I'll give it another go someday. And the less said about Star Wars Resistance, the better. I mean, what are they even resisting when the New Order wasn't even running around yet? Sort your friggin' timeline out, Disney! I'd basically all but given up on Disney Star Wars producing anything of noteworthy. I thought Halley's Comet would run across the sky and do an impromptu dance number before we got anything good out of that stupid studio. But then along came Andor. Now, I won't lie, when I heard that they were making an Andor television show, my first thoughts were, why? Then I heard it was being delayed and that Obi-Wan was going to be released first, so my next thoughts were, okay, trouble in paradise then. This show is going to suck harder than the Messier 87 supermassive black hole. Then the damn show came out and blew my mind, so I had so much egg on my face you could smack me with a skillet and call me an omelette. I didn't start watching the show until 7 episodes in, so I was able to completely binge half the season, which left me shivering like a sugar-obsessed child reprobate craving more and more. The first 2 episodes were kinda dull, but I think that's just par for the course with TV shows these days. It wasn't till the 3rd episode when things really started to take off, and once it did take off, there were no stops on this roller coaster. Now, was the show the second coming of the Lord Almighty on high? Not really. But was it a damn good watch that left me thoroughly satisfied like a big shaggy dog that's just had an amazing belly scratch? Damn straight it did. It had its litany of woes, but the pros of this show far outweighed the cons. So without further ado, let's jump right into this bad boy. So there were 12 episodes in this season, which is already a wonderful thing to see. This 6 to 8 episode a season rubbish with episodes barely running over 40 minutes long was so unbelievably maddening I've lost all of my hair from me pulling it all out in frustration. The episodes were still somewhat short with insanely long credit sequences, but with the longer seasons I didn't feel like I wasn't getting enough in the episode to tell its story. Plot points and characters had a pretty decent amount of time to explore their drives and motivations and move on from one plot to another. Although, speaking of characters, the show certainly wasn't hurting for characters, and there was a handful of characters whose names I couldn't remember if my life depended on it, and I just simply didn't care about them. Vel's weird girlfriend being one of them. I hate characters in shows that just have the one emotion, and what's-her-name suffered from it constantly. These were two characters who were supposed to be in love, and they somewhat addressed their strained relationship in the show with a bit of a throwaway line of how they don't really love each other, they only love each other because they're both committed to the cause or whatever. But my goodness, every time they were on screen together I was either bored or confused. I haven't seen such terrible chemistry since my days in high school. And this is only a small gripe, as there was more than enough in this show to make up for this quite frankly hilarious attempt at a sincere relationship. Another gripe that was actually a rather large bugbear for me was the editing of the show. Whoever edited this show and placed the clips in whatever order they were meant to be viewed must have been injecting straight caffeine into their veins and eyeballs. We would get 45 seconds with one subplot, then race over to another subplot, and have maybe another minute and a half with them, and then leg it to another subplot. The visual whiplash I would get was staggering. I wish they went with the Game of Thrones route and would just focus on one or two subplots an episode instead of trying to cover every single storyline in a single episode. This was my major problem with the show, and how it would jump around like a clown on a frigging pogo stick, which made it incredibly difficult for me to differentiate between different episodes. So rather than a few thoroughly unlikable or forgettable characters, with Mon Mothma's psycho daughter being a strong contender for worst character in this show, with her literally having no positive traits whatsoever, and editing that would give the Flash a headache, these are my only significant issues with the show. Now, let's move on to the juicy good stuff. The show focuses on the titular character Andor, and I must admit he was one of the weakest characters in the show. I didn't dislike him or think he was a bad character, but he didn't really make the story happen. The story more pushed his character on until the end of the show when he finally took charge and made something happen. I feel like the show was meant to be a story of how Andor was swept up into a larger conflict that he didn't want to be a part of, but the more he got swept into it, the more he couldn't turn a blind eye to what he was seeing. He was a very passive character, I found, and I find a character is always much more enjoyable when they make the story happen, rather than the story happening around them or to them. The show starts off with Andor trying to find his baby sister that he lost when he was a kid, and that story kinda gets dropped like a hot pocket, and then it turns into Ocean's 11, with Andor being recruited by Luthen, who, if he were any more kick-ass, he would simply turn into a big leather boot. They plan a heist job and rob the Empire's lovely big stash of gold, and then Andor gets put into prison 2 episodes later, but for some completely different reason, like walking on the sidewalk when he should have been walking in the gutter or something stupid like that. Then it turns into Prison Break, and Andor escapes from the facility the Empire is holding him in, and then it turns into Les Miserables, when Andor goes back home because he found out his mother died and the Empire have completely occupied the place, and so he wants to save his friends who have been caught up in the Empire's shenanigans. Now, that was a super abridged version of Andor's storyline, which sounds like a drunk dude just saying the first thing that pops into his noggin. And yet, surprisingly, because we have so many more episodes to deal with, each plot point actually feels naturally arrived at. The heist plot point has about 3 episodes of Andor and his new hoodlum friends planning it, actually committing the heist, and then the consequences of said heist lingers on and doesn't just disappear. You don't know how happy I was to see a Star Wars show that actually took its time to let things build up to give a really satisfying conclusion. It's the complete opposite of the floundering madness of Obi-Wan, where in that show they also planned a heist, but then continued to pull it off without a hitch and get away scot-free all in the same 30-minute episode. This show takes its time to set things up so we actually get a decent payoff, although sometimes the slow burn can get a wee bit obnoxious, like with the first 2 episodes taking forever to actually get going. If the show's burn were any slower, the damn thing would start running backwards. But I'll take slow and methodical storytelling over the story being told by a crackhead running on fast forward any day. In episode 4, titled Aldani, the entire episode is spent getting to know the new characters and showing how they're actually going to break into the facility, and going over minute details like how to march, what side to hold the gun on so it won't cast any suspicions on them. Then after an episode of planning, when they actually pull it off, it's successful, but not before several characters are killed and we get some of the most stunning visuals I've ever seen in a Star Wars show. The planet has this sort of solar flare go on, and Andor and his crew have to travel within it to shake off the Empire's fighters. And holy crap, it looked magnificent. Not every episode had an action sequence in it, which just made the action scenes that much more enjoyable. Speaking of action scenes and the Empire, you don't know just how extraordinarily exuberant I was when I saw how threatening the Empire was. After watching them get completely neutered in every other Star Wars show thus far, watching stormtroopers never miss their mark when shooting, and higher authorities in the Empire lead effectively and tactfully plan their ambushes and strikes, brought a tear to my eye. We don't see any stormtroopers for the first 4 or 5 episodes, so you know when they show up things are getting out of hand and that they're here to mess things up for our good guys. Obviously Andor can't die because this is a prequel and suffers the same fate as every other prequel, but we are introduced to other characters made to care for them, and then they're killed off an episode or 2 later because the stormtroopers are crack shots. This show actually convinced me that this was a government that could control the entire galaxy with trained soldiers, effective leadership, and the fact that the Empire ruled with fear and were able to follow up on their threats. In the final episode, Andor's home planet has a funeral for Andor's mother, who was a truly beloved member of the community, and it sparks a small revolution, and if this were any other Star Wars movie or show, the plucky peasants with the power of friendship would overpower the troopers and liberate their planet. Instead, the troopers frickin' mow them down without barely taking a single casualty, and it was actually sad, yet awesome at the same time. We had actually gotten to know the people of this planet. We got to know their culture and the way the people ran their day-to-day lives. So watching them get absolutely curb-stomped into the ground by the Empire, who has been utterly useless in previous Star Wars movies and shows, I had so many emotions running through me, and it brought back moments of watching Game of Thrones before it turned into a big pile of brown smelly stuff. The Empire felt like this Lovecraftian behemoth that was everywhere and knew everything, and nothing happened without them knowing. They knew you were going to pick your nose before you even had an itch or a booger in there. They were all seen and all knowing, and hot damn, it was fantastic. One thing I loved about the show was it gave me a bit more of a reason to actually root for the rebellion in A New Hope, because all the Empire did in that movie was turn Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen into an overcooked pate and nuke Alderaan, but who cares about Alderaan? I'm going solely off Disney's Star Wars universe and what's canon, and not what's in the EU, so according to Disney, I should care about Alderaan because we saw it briefly in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's where Leia is from. Okay, I care more about the possibility of Jimmy Smits dying, but he was old, so again, why do I care? In Andor, we see the Empire being an oppressive, dictatorial, psychotic killing machine, so of course we want to see them get overthrown. Although all the major heads of the Empire are British, so I'm getting mixed emotions here, because long live Britannia. The sun never sets on the British Empire! Sorry, I got a bit carried away there. Where was I? Oh, yeah. The Empire is awesome, and Deidre is the angriest woman I've ever seen, and her constant scowl was friggin' hilarious. The woman could outscowl a toddler who was just denied a chocolate ice cream, and something came to my mind while I was watching her scowl a black hole into existence. Why did I find myself liking Deidre and not Reva? On paper, they're the same character. Both are strong, independent women in some position of power that shows no emotion other than pure, unrefined dissatisfaction, who gets things done their way and doesn't get along with other people, period. But I found myself liking Deidre because there were moments where she was genuinely flummoxed by something, and didn't know what to do because she was so confused, like when Cyril Khan, a member of the Empire's security branch, and Andor's self-imposed arch-nemesis, professes his love for her in a scene that I don't know if we were meant to laugh with or at the show. It was so uncomfortable, but so damn funny, I couldn't look away and couldn't stop laughing. And I want to give the show the benefit of the doubt and say we were meant to laugh with them and not at them. But Deidre is just so confused and even threatens to kill him should she ever see him again. But of course, when he saves her life in the final episode, she thanks him, and honestly, I don't know what was going through her head in that scene. But she didn't come off as a smug, self-entitled asshole like Reva did, and Deidre actually had to work with others and depend on others to get the job done. So she had flaws, she had dependencies, and actually seemed like a real human character. Except for the single emotion she possessed, which I feel could have been toned down just a smidge. But That's all I have to say about the Empire. It was great to see them being a commanding and dominating force in the galaxy, and seeing the characters that made up the Imperial branch actually be likable was fantastic! There were two other main storylines that happened alongside Andor's and the Empire's plot points, and they were Mon Mothma's story and Luthen's story. Now, I found Mon Mothma's story to definitely be the weakest, but that's not to say it was bad or the actors did a bad job. It was quite interesting to see the political side of this world and how people played the game in high society. My problem with it was that it didn't really go anywhere, and I feel like this season was just setting itself up for the next season, and I hate that in movies and shows. It's one of the main reasons why I got sick of Marvel long before the ludicrous evil Phase 4 came into existence. I want the story to be good now, not in a year's time. The actress that played Mon Mothma, Genevieve O'Reilly, did a rather superb job as Mon Mothma, even though she looks nothing like Mon Mothma in Return of the Jedi, but I really don't care about that, I just thought it was a funny thing to point out. I think our story could have benefited from a good firecracker up the bum to get things moving, because this storyline was what I meant by if the slow burn were any slower, the fire would go out. It had a lot of potential because the characters were exceptional, minus the irritating teenage daughter. The idea of the story was brilliant, and the plotting and scheming while smiling and waving was awesome. But by the end of the season I thought to myself, well, that was a bloody faff. So here's hoping Season 2 redeems this plot point, because I really do want it to be good. Luthen was the MVP for me in this show. Played by the truly remarkable and outstanding Stellan Skarsgård, the man proves that almost anything he touches turns to gold. First thing I saw him in was Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest, and I thought he was brilliant back then. Watching him make more of a name for himself in things like Chernobyl, the Pirates franchise, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, and other great movies and shows, every time he was on screen I was smiling like a big dopey kid at Christmas. His monologue that he makes in episode 10, One Way Out, about the things that he's had to give up and the things that he's had to sacrifice, made me literally say out loud, where the hell does Disney get off having dialogue this bloody good? Whoever wrote the dialogue to this show absolutely knocked it out of the park, and whoever was in charge of casting did a remarkable job as well, although minus the couple of duds I've already mentioned. One thing I do hate about Luthen is his awkward to pronounce name. Why not just name him Luther? Sounds so much better and rolls off the tongue much nicer than Luthen. It's like hearing Mike Tyson trying to say the word loosen but with his trademark lisp. But yes, Luthen's story is all about how he is slowly piecing together the rebellion, and you see all throughout the show how he is haunted by the choices he's been forced to make, and how he has had to cut himself off from all kinds of attachments, so he is truly alone, with no one to call a friend or family. He has allies, and that's it, and it weighs heavily on his mind, and Stellan Skarsgård absolutely nails the performance. Luthen is the real driving force behind this show, and is the one that really makes things happen, and Andor thankfully eventually becomes that person later on in the show when he has to break out from prison. Now, these three storylines made up the bulk of the show, and there were other smaller plot points, but they ultimately tied back to the main three in some way, and if I went through every single plot point in this show, I'd be here till bloody Christmas. Although, I shall give a quick shout out to my boy Andy Serkis, who absolutely killed it, and more than redeemed himself for his last entry in the Star Wars universe as Snoke. The episode One Way Out was by far the best episode, all thanks to Serkis and Skarsgård with their truly phenomenal acting. So, not much else to say really, other than this show hasn't exactly restored my faith in Disney Star Wars, but this, combined with Tales of the Jedi, have made me take notice again and be excited for what they bring out next. Their ridiculous roadmap still makes me cringe whenever I see it, because I hate the idea of making a movie or a show simply because that's what we have to do. I want to see movies and shows being made because the creator has thought that it would be really delightful to tell this kind of story. Not because, I'll bet this will make some serious bank. I want to see the creativity and the risks taken with Andor and more things, and have stories told that will not berate me with identity politics or modern social issues. Tell me a story because you think it's a story worth telling, and then when you tell it well. Andor was told bloody brilliantly, and I'm so excited for Season 2. Also, one last thing before I sign off. Did anyone else find it weird when people started swearing in the show? Back in The Last Jedi, Finn says the words, "You murdering bastards." I thought that was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. But in this show, we got bastards and an S-bomb. Like, holy crap, Star Wars, when did you get so edgy? I mean, I wasn't against it necessarily, because it was used kinda well, but wow. How long is it going to be until we get F-bombs in Star Wars? Is someone going to say, "May the Force be with you," and then someone else is going to turn around and look into the camera and say, "Get